I got retina
Welcome
issues.
to Coffee and History, a conversation with Alabama Heritage. We are your hosts. I'm Rebecca Mender,
Susan Reynolds,
and Caroline Gazera McKenzie.
Join us as we sit down with some of the most fascinating figures in the historical community. Over a hot or a cold cup of coffee, we'll explore some of the captivating tales of Alabama, stories that educate, inspire, and we hope entertain. We are thrilled to have all of you, our followers and listeners, here with us today.
Now, before we get into introducing our special guest, this is for today's episode, we're going to start off with a Did You Know section. So, Susan, I just want to know, what do you know about Marie Bankhead Owen? Do you know anything?
not a whole lot. I mean, I know who she is, but yeah.
Okay, so for those who don't know, Marie Bankhead Owen is the former director of the Alabama Department of Archives and History, and she actually went on she wrote a column titled Talks with Girls, and her column was really successful that a New York newspaper offered her a job on spot.
That's awesome.
Obviously, she didn't want to take it. She turned it down and later went on to work and serve as on the League of Southern Writers.
Wow,
That's really
Talks with Girls. I wonder what kind of topics they talked about.
We'll have to explore it more for sure.
And why was it girls and not women?
I don't know. I'll have to do some more diving into her, but I just thought she was so fascinating as a woman who was offered a job and turned it down to do something completely different.
A job in New York.
Yeah.
And she decided to stay in Alabama. I mean, who does that?
You know, she was
Me.
campaigning. She was campaigning for women's rights, literacy. You know, that's wonderful to just keep.
I could do that as well, but from New York would be nice because I don't know. I don't know if I could live in New York, honestly. I'd love to visit there, but
I definitely could not.
I don't think I would want to live there. I have lots of friends who do, and I have, my stepdaughter does, but it's like, I don't think I could.
I love Alabama, so I'm not planning on leaving anytime soon. But thinking of that, Susan, do you want to introduce our first guest?
Of course, and our first guest has lived lots of places, and I have an official bio and an unofficial bio. So our first guest today, or our only guest, sorry, is Sharony Green. She's a professor of history at the University of Alabama. And in spring 2021, she was an Andrew W. Mellon Foundation Fellow at Chicago's Newberry Library. And during this time, she completed her research for The Chase in the Ruins, Zora Neale Hurston in Honduras, which she actually wrote an article for us about, which is fascinating. So that's the official bio. Of course, I'm leaving a ton of stuff out. She is just an amazing person. But unofficially, she is just one of my best friends, and also I just think she's one of the most creative and beautiful souls and such a gift to our campus. So welcome, Sharony Green.
Welcome.
Hi. Glad you're here. Good
Hi,
to see
Sharony.
y'all. Yes, it's so great to have you. I'm
Thanks.
really excited. So I know like you wear many hats. So officially you're a professor here at UA, which is awesome, and I know that you just have great experiences with your students. I've spoken to one of your classes before, and they just have such an amazing dynamic with you. But you've also done many other things in your life, so tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I think not unlike you, I was a writer, like journalist.
Mhm.
So that was my first career. I worked for the then Night Raider newspapers, and then it became McClatchy, and I saw newspapers going the way of the dinosaur. So I worked at the Miami Herald, Detroit Free Press, and my last gig was business editor at the Columbus Ledger in Columbus, Georgia.
Wow.
Ledger Inquirer, and I just saw that book right there on Columbus. Right there by the
Fascinating.
Chattahoochee
Awesome.
River. Best sunset.
But no, you're really, honestly, I would define you as a Renaissance woman.
Absolutely.
Because, I mean, and I think it's funny that, or maybe it's not funny, but a lot of the work that you do is on Zora Neale Hurston. And, if you just even look up her bio and compare it side by side with yours, you are today's generation's Zora in my mind. Because,
Whoa.
and so, it makes me wonder because, all right, so you're a writer, you're a historian, you are an artist, you are a documentarian. I mean, all of the things, let's list them, right? And then look at what Zora did. And so it makes me wonder, did you feel like a connection with her in some capacity, that you wanted to, study more about her and write about her? Or do you think maybe you evolved as this Renaissance woman after paying attention to what it was that she did?
I believe that I was my own person, and then I was increasingly encouraged by her life and her experiences. She was born in January, and so was I. She actually passed away on my birthday in the state in which I was born, 7 years before I was born.
Again, as I say, you are today's generation, Zora, so.
That's generous. She's a genius. I wouldn't call myself a genius, but I do know that she paid a high cost to being unapologetically herself. And I know that there are some folks who are like, oh, what is she doing now? Or and I get it. I recently read some Rate My Professors. I don't usually do that.
Oh, goodness.
I had a student reach out to me with this wonderful email, and I was like, wow, this is great. Sometimes you get those emails, but then the next day Rate My Professor emailed me. That was like 2 days ago. You have a new review. I'm like, that never happened before. So that made me read it, and then, of course it was probably the person who just emailed me.
Aww.
But then I was like, well, let me just see what else is here.
Yeah, that might have been your big mistake right there.
So
That's very bold.
Yeah, and then I scrolled down and I discovered a series of not so nice reviews, and I quickly knew who the people were. But I just met someone who said, sometimes you should just say, okay, what is it that they're saying? And then who are they? And then I was like, you know what? Maybe I do need to slowly let people know who I am, why I tell stories the way I do, why I lecture the way I do, be very aware of who they are and maybe what they bring to the table, just to calm everybody down, because I just assume that, well, you already learned this, or you've met crazy people like me.
Aren't all professors supposed to be a little bit crazy?
We are clueless.
My favorite professors were a little bit crazy.
Yeah.
I can say that.
So there you go.
Well,
It brings a little entertainment to
They
the classroom.
they stick around in my brain for sure.
Yeah.
So
But what I love about you as a professor is that because you have such an eclectic background and such eclectic interests, you bring that into the classroom and you allow your students like these incredible opportunities to do things that most of the time they're never going to have another opportunity to do again, especially in a college campus where most of the time, we're bringing our students in for their lecture for an hour Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and just we get it done because everybody's busy and then they go back out into the world. But you take them out of the classroom, and one thing I want to talk to you about is your public history book, which I just thought was amazing. And I'm so happy I got to be one of your first readers on that. But talk a little bit about what you do with your students, taking them out and letting them experience the history around here.
Sure. So from the moment I arrived here, I was just intrigued by all of the rich history that animates our campus, that animates our town. And I mean it from the bottom of my heart. I'm just like, why are we in the classroom when all of the things that we need are literally outside? And there's some amazing community partners who are so willing to be storytellers with me. And I think literally my first year on the tenured track, it was called at the time the Tuscaloosa Preservation Society. I think they're in historic preservation now. I was like co-winner of Teacher of the Year. I'm like, what is that? Like, I think it was Rachel Stevenson and I, we arrived here at the same time. I'm like, we're just doing our jobs. But it was nice to have that kind of affirmation that you can go downtown to Jemison Mansion and the Old Tavern Museum, and of course Gorgas House Museum and Bryce Hospital before it was this beautiful welcome center. Like, my students just went to Bryce and saw how beautiful it is, but I was like, let's show you some pictures of what other students saw.
Right.
yeah.
And then, of course, Steve Davis, great storyteller. He just parts the curtain and helps them like understand why that building matters. And it's
Do you think that the students are actually absorbing that? I mean, because a lot of them do go into So for the people who are not familiar, you know, the Bryce Hospital was originally the insane asylum here in Tuscaloosa. It's now owned by the University of Alabama. And it is a beautiful, gorgeous, you know, multi-million-dollar facility that is our official welcome center. But there is, you know, on the second floor especially, they have a museum that shows some of the history of that facility, and there's a lot of stories. We've got a story, you know, even in one of our issues about some of the coal mining incidents that happened at that time. And I feel like a lot of people do not understand, because they see it as a really pretty diamond in our community, but then they don't realize all the stories that are behind it. So how do you feel your students are absorbing that kind of information with the alternate information, as opposed to just here's some nice fancy television screens that show you a jumbotron view of the stadium, you know, as opposed to the people who were enslaved and worked in the facility and things of that nature?
Generally speaking, most of them realize that this is a huge privilege to enter these spaces, and what's wonderful is watching what they do with that information. One student who went to Jemison, her final project, she did a painting with what looked like maybe a bowl of fruit in a window. They're just circles, and they were colored like different tones, but mostly brown. But what she was gesturing toward was the faceless who built this building. Who are these people whose names we'd never know? But most of the painting was this beautiful antebellum building, what we mostly pay attention to. But she's delving into who created this building. Yesterday I was in Gorgas' house, and Sonia Harwood Johnson, the director, said, "Oh, one of your students who was here like the third or fourth week of school, he comes in here all the time."
That's awesome.
And so I think more often than not, they are like really happy to have this chance to learn, and some of the stories aren't difficult. The women students in particular want to know about a Dorothea Dix and Amelia Gorgas, a Sarah Gale. It's stunning. Increasingly, that's what they focus. They like, you don't even have to give them a cue. They know that they fit into this larger history of women doing amazing things in ways that people may not always see.
Right. And it's so easy just to walk down the street and not pay attention to any of that, because we are so busy. And that's what I appreciate so much about your work and your students and your class, because your students are so engaged. I mean, they're some of the most engaged students I've ever seen in my life. I'm jealous. So my students looked at me and were like, "Oh, Lord Byron again." I think it's wonderful. I really, really do.
Now, for all of us who don't know what you teach, can you tell us what you teach?
Sure. Oh, so many things.
Yes.
Well, I do the two surveys, so American Civilization to 1865 and since 1865. But my two core upper level classes are Antebellum America, which is great. It's so generic because I get easily bored, so I can just keep changing the record every semester and still use the public history as sort of a grounding element. And the other class is American Swagger, which again, it has sort of a generic feel, but not entirely, because how can swagger be boring? But I could focus on what it means to have swag in the years leading to the Civil War. So people like Andrew Jackson, and increasingly John Brown is something that the students are really drawn to. I mean, students on both sides of the political aisle are really interested in this man who believed in his principles so much that, you know, he took on a federal, you know, arsenal. Like, whoa! I'm like, where did this come from? So this semester we use the song Battle Hymn of the Republic as an entry point to learn about him and the ties to that song, between him and that song, and very intrigued by how they delved into that.
Swagger. I love that idea of having even swagger in the title of a class. I mean, that's something that you would not expect. Is this under the history department?
Yes.
Or which? Okay.
Yeah, so, I mean, sometimes it is cross-listed with other classes, like I think even sociology was
That makes
one
sense.
of the,
Yeah.
I was like, wow, a sociologist.
But I could see that because you're studying, you know, what it was like with the people that during that time period, and yeah, I mean, because the person I know most that has the most swagger in American politics, Barack Obama. I mean, you know,
Yeah,
I
he
feel
had
like
swag.
I felt like he had a lot of swag, and so I think that's just kind of fascinating to be able to take that back, you know, and study people before his time to see what you know.
There's so many, like Mary Fields, Stagecoach Mary. She was the second woman. She's African American woman. I think she's from Tennessee, but she ends up out west. So she's like that quintessential, you know, person who's got the gun going into saloons. But she was the second woman to work for the U.S. Postal Service, and she, you know, that story that we hear, the weather didn't stop her. She always made her deliveries, but she also was a laundress on the side, like a lot of women of color in that day. And if you didn't pay for your laundry, boy, she'd step to you, and she was so loved by the people in her town that they had a beautiful funeral for her when she passed away, and they took care of her when she got older. So she's part of our complex past and present. I love helping our students see that, you know, even if we tend to want things to be so black and white, they're often very gray. You know, definitely complicated people. We all are complicated people.
Absolutely.
Such as yourself. And I mean, I have this question about, you know, how you decided that this is what you wanted to land on as a career path, because, you know, as we were mentioning before, you being such a Renaissance woman, because you do, you know, I would call it outsider art. So you create art.
I have my Swiftie bracelet that she just gifted me, which is just like the best thing ever.
And so, I mean, that's one minor aspect. I think, weren't you a dancer at some point in your life as well? And, you know, and then of course you're a documentarian. I mean, so how, with all of these different and varied interests, how did you land on the idea that, you know, this is what I want to do? I want to teach students, and, you know, does that keep you from your regular 8 to 5? Does that keep you from doing all of these other activities that you want to do, or how do you balance all of that?
Well, I think ultimately I'm just a storyteller, and I just have all these different platforms to do it. But again, I was a journalist, and I saw that the industry was changing. And Susan knows this story. I was in New York City when the towers fell. So we earlier talked about New York, and that was really it for me in terms of like being laid off, and you have to reinvent yourself. And I was in a high school working as a substitute teacher, and I saw this book about antebellum women, this classic book, Evergreen White Black Women, and I just wanted to explore the trauma that Black women felt before the Civil War. Like, how do you really do that? How do you even document it? I was like, well, I could use my body. So that's a quirky Sharony. I'm gonna apply to a graduate program, because a friend of mine, she was saying, you need to get into archive. Well, what's an archive, you know? And she had to go back to school. So my last name is Green, and I said, I'm gonna pick a school in a town with the word green in it, quirky Sharony, and it had to be in the South because my best friend lived in the South, and she lived in North Carolina, so it ended up being UNC Greensboro. I had no idea that it was number 4 in the country for dance research, and John Gamble just took a chance on me. He was like one of the pioneers in what we call contact improv dance. Like, I touch you, and your body does something based on how I touch you, and I don't know. Nikki Giovanni passed away 2 days ago.
Yeah.
We can't talk about what just happened.
Recently.
Yeah, recently, right? And I remember he put me on stage, like, she hasn't danced since high school, like I was on a pom-pom team. So I'm just gonna let her read Nikki Giovanni poems. So I'm a mid-career woman, late 30s, with these people half my age dancing around me and my voice. I had a cold, and I sounded like Wheezy on the Jeffersons.
Oh.
But it was amazing that he had that much trust, and I worked a lot with historians at UNC Greensboro, and it was them who kept saying, we like the questions you're asking, keep going. And I'm like, go where? Get a PhD, and then what? I don't know, just keep going. And I met John Wheeler, who also teaches in history along the way, because he was born in Greensboro, he was visiting a friend.
That's so funny. Yeah, I remember the very first time I met you was at the Southern Historical Association conference in Mobile, and I knew John because he was actually on my dissertation committee. And then I met you, and I was like, oh my gosh, you know, this is so crazy, and it's been great ever since.
I just love the idea of like literally throwing a dart at a map to say this is where I'm gonna go. I mean, I mean, it's like I'm gonna just move somewhere where the word green is in it because that's my name. And it's like, wow, I love
I
that.
found my apartment because my best friend's kids picked it out. I told her that she lived in Raleigh on a golf course. I was like, well, they've only seen a golf course. They know the right apartment. So she drove them over. And she said, well, they picked us a place in Northwest Greensboro. And I shipped all my stuff there. The UPS man was like, who is this person moving from New York with all these boxes? And yeah, and I love the apartment. It wasn't like
You're very trusting. You're a very trusting person in communities and just not knowing this is what's going to happen. So
I feel like you're very self-actualized because you can just, like you said, you picked someplace because it had the name Green in it. I've done things like that too because why not?
why not?
Yeah.
So I really, like, for my generations and younger, you know, you just inspire me because I'm like, okay, I'm normal now.
No, it was a no-brainer.
I mean, what is normal, really?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
I think being abnormal is normal.
And there have been people like that throughout time. I mean, think about the hippies who just, you know, I mean, there are groups of people like that every time, and they're always some of the most creative people, so that's awesome.
I just figured I had nothing to lose. I just saw these two buildings fall, and you realize how urgent life is. So I don't want to like play that down too much.
And you're originally from Florida, right?
From Miami, Florida,
Okay.
and to like be in a situation where you know life as we know it is forever changed. You know, to walk down the street and the cops are saying, a cop literally told me for the first time in my life, I don't know what to tell you. Like I don't know where you're supposed to be walking.
Yeah.
And it just something inside you shifts, and I think you can't look back. You just know it could all be over very quickly, so you should just go for it.
I think we all remember where we were at 9/11 and, you know, but just being there as it happened, I just can't even empathize. There's no way that I could feel what you felt during that time, and I know it had to have been quite a challenge. So.
Yeah, even when I hear sirens, if I hear too many sirens right now, I'm you know, like I'm trying not to be triggered right now,
Right,
but you just never forget.
Well, we have, you know, a certain amount of PTSD as well with being from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and tornadoes that happen, and the big tornado that happened here in April 2011, and that completely wiped out my home. And we were in the house when it happened, and you know, so you hear, and they say, you know, people ask you, did it sound like a freight train? Because a lot of people will say that. To me, no. It sounded like I was standing right outside a jet engine, you know, of a plane, and it was just that sound. And then, of course, with the compression of the air, and so you have all of these physical memories, you know, of how it affected you physically being right there under the eye of the tornado. And so there are a lot of things that I can understand in terms of, you know, I just call it PTSD because it's exactly what it is that, you know, because we even had, you know, just the slightest little wind and a tree branch pops off. A small little tiny tree branch will pop off and fell on my car, and it just made me burst out into tears and panic at that moment. And so I can see that. I just can't imagine, and that's just, you know, I don't know. It's just so different. We, you know, with 9/11, I just felt like it was so different that it affected so much more. But our community was in Tuscaloosa. A lot of it was wiped out. You know, we didn't have as many people injured or died, but it was still, you know, pretty devastating. So I want to not talk about sad things anymore.
Well, I have exciting things.
Yeah. For the first time ever, I think I know why I left the classroom a lot. I arrived here 3 weeks after that tornado.
Oh.
And so many people, if I would say I need to get XYZ, or I asked my husband, he says, it's where blah, blah, blah used to be. I had no reference point.
Right.
So my first year in Tuscaloosa, I had to be curious about what else was out there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the water towers that helped me anchor myself in the city. And it wasn't until I listened to you just now that I really understood. It was discovery from day one. Because I was in graduate school with a commuter marriage, and it was 2011 when I came here permanently. So thank you for that.
Oh,
It was a tornado.
You know,
That's so funny.
Rick Bragg wrote this interesting piece. He, I don't know if he still does it, but I know he had a page that he was doing in Southern Living magazine, and he was living in Tuscaloosa when that tornado came through, and his very next piece was walking outside his front door, looking to the left of his house, and there's a huge water tower. And he said, who knew? He said, I had no idea there was this huge water tower at the end of my street. And that's because we have so many trees and other structures that, you know, have been demolished from the winds. And so it does change your entire perspective. So, you know, your husband Beeler, it's like when he says, well, that's where it used to be. You know, a lot of us still reference things that way, and it's been, you know, 14 years since the tornado, and, you know, there's a lot of that kind of, I'll call it southern directions, because we used to do that before tornadoes anyway, but it's like, well, you know where the Kmart used to be, and now it's Planet Fitness, but you want to turn, remember where that big oak tree used to be? That's where you're gonna turn. And so it's those types of directions my family has always given anyway, but it's even worse now that a lot of places have not still returned to normalcy since that tornado, so. But yes, let's talk about something a little bit more.
Okay, well, this is just something I saw recently. So the Encyclopedia of Alabama announced their top hits of the 2024 year, and one of the top most hits, I believe it was number 10 on the Encyclopedia of Alabama's website, was the blurb about Zora Neale Hurston.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought that was amazing. So I just wanted to ask you, as someone who, I learned about Zora through this job actually. We were about to publish an article, I think it was issue 146.
It was Sharony's article.
Yeah, it was Sharony's. And it was, so that's how I started learning about her. And I'm a military child, so I moved all over her. But for it to still be something people learn about, and like just random people Googling, how does that feel?
Amazing. I mean, I must admit, I didn't know who she was until I was in middle school, and it's because of a book that my grandmother purchased in a thrift store. It's just like, and this is the word, Negro short stories. And it was her Gilded Six-Bit story. And even still, her name didn't mean a lot to me. I took African American literature class at the University of Miami as an undergrad, and she wasn't on the syllabus. And it is what it is. So people are, I was just in Oak Alley, present day Melbourne, Florida, and you know, I love arts festivals. It's how I kind of breathe through a lot. And I'm like, do you guys know this was her happy spot? Oak Alley. This is where she lived in a cabin, and this was her happy spot. And the Indian River is there, and the Atlantic Ocean is there. Like, who is she? But you're telling me, like, you're a 180. You're like, people do want to know.
Yeah.
So I think it's great. I wish it had happened in her lifetime, because as we know, she died penniless, but she died doing what she wanted to do. And she asked us, she said, don't bother about me because you can never understand me. You know, she was just gonna keep climbing out on limbs, and you know, my husband always says limbs are made for climbing out on, so that's probably one reason why I do crazy things or what appears to be crazy. But no, she's absolutely amazing, and I really want Alabama or Alabamians to start claiming her more, because I'm from Florida and we tend to claim her because she claimed Florida. She said, I like the sunshine, the way it's done down there. But she was born, you know, in Notasulga, up the street up the road from Tuskegee.
Yeah.
And in this manuscript I'm playing with right now, there's some poetry, and I bring in her ancestors, including her grandpa. And I'm like, if we really peeled apart Ancestry.com and all the towns that her people came from in Alabama, it's a lovely map. And I think it's time for our state to reclaim her. Eatonville is
Absolutely.
wonderful,
Yeah.
but she was from Alabama.
She
Yeah.
was, and you know, I feel so fortunate because my 11th grade English teacher, Laura Hunter, who I adore to this day, she actually made that one, Their Eyes Were Watching God, one of our required books that year that
Wonderful.
we read in the fall semester. I believe it's 1992. And I fell in love with that book. And I didn't read it again until I was in grad school in an American literature class. So I love books like hers because, like all great literature, you can come back to it at different points in your life, and it serves different needs at different points in your life. So
Yeah, she's that, you mentioned what it means to be Southern. We like to tell stories down here.
Yeah.
And she was a storyteller. She loved being from the South. She was a core member of the Harlem Renaissance, but she loved being here in the South. And she actually went out on a limb and said, the closest you're gonna get to, and you know more about this than I do, Susan, Elizabethan speech is the Southerner. She said no one can tell a story like a Southern politician. You put them up there and man, it could go on forever and you're gonna keep listening.
Yeah.
And so she learned all those stories, from the folks at that general store in Eatonville. And
well, and the front porch. The front porch is such a huge thing, so
Yeah, everybody sat on the front porch, and there wasn't really anything to do. You didn't have air conditioning. It would be hot down here, so you sit on the front porch, and then everybody just shoots the breeze and tells
That's
tall
actually
tale.
why I found my house,
Yeah.
is because I could imagine my porch and
Having
my rocking chairs, which have to go back inside always because of the wind.
Yeah, so I
you
think
can see everything.
Yeah.
I remember doing that with my grandfather. We would sit on the front porch, and he would tell stories, and I wish honestly that I was a better recipient of his stories at a young age, because I'm sure everything he said was monumental. And I think a lot of times children don't appreciate and understand it until it's too late. And then it's like, you want those front porch stories. I think that's fantastic.
They
to
sustain
have.
us.
Yeah.
But I think that you do absorb things even though you don't realize it as a
Right.
child. Like with you with reading that first story by Zora, you may not have come back to her for a long time, but then, that stayed with you.
Yeah, she's just so familiar. And I just wanted to quickly say, in the public history book, I talk about what's next. And, I'm not always sure what I can do because you need funding, but one thing I did do recently, and I put a postcard that I just made at Walgreens, I'll give you one tip. So when I got back from Eau Gallie, you're in the car driving a lot, went down to Florida, saw my mom do the festival, and Beeler's driving, I'm like, okay, what am I gonna do next? And I always wanted to do an installation of every piece of art I made since I arrived at Alabama. But like, where do you do it? Do you have a warehouse? Do you have a storefront? Can somebody along your building? It's like, well, you do have a shed in your front yard. So it's been, talk about front porch, it's been interesting watching people on Highway 216 looking at me creating my installation right there in my front yard. And I think I have like 400 pieces. I have more than I could probably get on the wall. But the idea of sort of reclaiming what it means to be Southern, acknowledging that it is okay to breathe by being creative. So every brush stroke, every line, every nail. I love old wood because my grandpa was a carpenter, and there's just a lot of wood in there, and all the wood is from Alabama that my husband found on the side of the road.
Nice.
So it's just sort of like this. Someone said, call it Watts Tower East. I don't know what it is, but but again, it's because we've lost trees recently. You can see straight into our yard now, because you know how our yard used to be like.
I was thinking, how do they see you from the road? But now
Yeah, we had 3 trees just taken down. There's like a fungus going around.
Yeah.
Anyway, the folks slowing down. I was like, John, we're gonna have to put a sign up. He was like, I don't want these people in our yard. I'm like, I don't know. And maybe we should just say there's a little art workshop. And there's nothing for sale. In fact, I'm using 2-sided glue, that really sticky stuff, so they never come off the wall. It's like,
You literally could become a roadside attraction. And so when my husband and I travel, we do a lot of traveling, and a lot of it by car. And so when I'm going from point A to point B, I will literally go search roadside attractions. So that way it would be something fun for us to stop. I mean, it could be we saw the largest Larry Bird sculpture made out of wood. Now, I didn't really want to see it, but my husband's best friend is a big Larry Bird fan. So we drove there just to take a picture to send it to him so he could see it actually exists. But I mean, those types of, roadside attractions I think are a lot of fun, and it gives, families things to do
Why not?
on road trips. So you could become the next one. I think that would be fun.
We'll see. People are already attracted to it looks like a hee-haw house. We were in England and
You just need a little lazy dog laying by the side of it,
in Minnie Pearl's dress somewhere.
Yes.
One of our,
Price tag hanging
Yeah.
from the hat.
a grad student called us in England and was like, Dr. Green, there's a man named Pete sitting on porch of your shed. And I asked him why, and he said he just liked it. He's like,
Well, alrighty then.
I love it.
like, oh, you APD? I was like, maybe y'all could do a couple more swings around. We're like, we're sure he's fine, but he only likes it. If that's the only reason why he's there, then maybe we'll give him something to look at now.
Yeah, there you go. That sounds good.
There's a nice ADT camera facing him too, but
Yeah, right.
You can wave at the camera.
Well, Sharony, we've had such a great time talking to you, but before you go, we have a segment that we like to ask our guests, a few somewhat rapid fire questions, but a little bit off the cuff of what we've been discussing already. So if you're willing to
Yes.
play along, we'll ask you a few before you go questions. So being from Florida, I want to know if snow or no. Do you like the snow?
I love the snow. As long as it goes away fast.
So I know you lived in New York for a while, but do you
Yeah.
get exposed to the
I
snow
lived
often?
in Detroit, yeah. Like the first story that Free Press sent me out on, they're like, you gotta go to Royal Oak. And I was like, well, how do you do that? There's ice on the road.
Figure it out.
Ball tires, old cars, you'll get there. And it was so much fun.
Mhm.
Yeah. So no, I love it as long as it goes away.
Yeah.
Fast.
Well, that's a good thing about the South,
Yeah.
especially here in Alabama. It'll snow, but then 6 hours later, it's gone. Instead of 6 months, it's 6
Mhm.
hours, and
I
then
like looking at how
then
the
it's
cats
spring.
look at it. Like we had a cat who's no longer with us, and when the snow would fall down, he'd just go.
Oh, yeah.
So going off of that, are you a cat person, dog person?
Dog.
Really?
I am allergic to cats and dogs, and I married Catman. We had 5 cats. We have our last one, Miss Ashley Monster.
You have 5 cats.
We
You're
had-
allergic to them, but you prefer dogs.
And I'm like ER allergic to dogs. But if I'm on the quad and someone has a dog, I will go kiss the dog and then run into the library and take my Benadryl. A dog can lick my face and just knock me over and jump on me, and I'm gonna be the happiest person in the world.
If that's how you go, that's how you go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I actually took a dog home, a student on the quad. He had a sign that says $20 or he's going to the pound. And I thought that was so mean.
Oh.
And he wanted to be a I don't know, he wanted to be some kind of, I don't know, physical therapy person. His mom was mad at him, and so he was sleeping on someone's sofa. And long story short, he named a dog Jose Cuervo, so you know that was so I gave him $20. And my husband's like, so where do you think this is all going? I was like, I don't know how it ends, but he's not going to the pound.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I made him a bed, and I was, of course, by the 3rd day.
Yeah.
And he now lives on an 80-acre farm.
Is his
Oh.
name still Jose Cuervo?
Probably.
it's
I
a
like
college
it.
name for sure.
Yeah, I just love them, and I think I'm a dog whisperer because they just stop when they see
Yeah.
me.
Oh, my
Aw.
Madison would have loved you.
I love dogs.
Mm. Well, I want to know, what is your next project? Have you got a passion project right now you're thinking about, or are you planning anything?
Okay, so it's a 2-part question. So Zora actually slowed me down with the Miami book, which makes me a little sad, or maybe a lot of sad, because that Miami book actually I won a grant for. And I was about to give up and put it on open access last week, because it's been peer reviewed a million times, but as you guys know with oral histories, you have to be a good steward when people open their hearts, and 7 of the 37 people I interviewed have passed away since 2013, and these are elders who who really opened their hearts to tell me about what it was like to migrate to South Florida, and most of them came from the South. Long story short, while I was at the American Anthropological Association meeting, a couple of editors are like, "Don't give up yet," and one of them actually happens to be an editor here, who said, "Don't give up, Wendy." So I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But the point is, when I just decided to try it one more time because I don't want it to be an academic book, and now that I don't have to, write a book that's going to get me tenure or get me promoted. I want to write a book that the people I interviewed can read, like my grandmother. I mean, it doesn't mean a rigger can't be there.
Mhm.
So that's there. But then going back to Hurston, so y'all know that she was, maybe you don't know, she was obsessed with Herod, the biblical character, before she died. And even asked Winston Churchill to write the preface to her unpublished book on Herod. And that book will be out at last this January.
Wow.
And I'm participating in the first ever Zora Summit at Barnard, and she was the first Black graduate of Barnard, and so I'm like,
That's so exciting, though.
So I'm excited. So I say all that to say, I'm interested in Churchill, Elizabethan. Like, if you look at her letters since 1940s, she keeps going back to England. There's something about the English. And in 1939, her Tell My Horse book, her folklore, Jamaica, Haiti, was reprinted in England, Book of the Month in England.
Wow.
And there's something about, I think, African Americans who find in Europe some of the things they can't find here. So we know Richard Wright, James Baldwin, blah, blah, blah. And she wanted to go to England before she died. She never left this side of the pond. So I'm sort of working on that, and I presented a paper in England on that, and it won honorable mention for best paper in the conference, and I'm not even a Europeanist. So that's exciting. I mean, to be around Beeler's people. I'm an Americanist. Like, I'm Andrew Jackson, the Fort Sumter girl, and to go over there and hang out with folks who know a lot about Europe, who took a chance on an Americanist presenting a paper. So
we're gonna let the folks know that Beeler is your husband.
Yes. So anyway, I want to get the Miami book out, but I also want folks to know about Hurston and the British Empire.
It's going to be fascinating. Absolutely.
And it has to be fun too.
Yeah.
I don't think
Of
she
course. Look, I don't think you can do things that are boring. Anything that you do is always going to have fun in it. So, and I think this interview has been fun, and we've really appreciated having you here. So we definitely want to thank our guest, Sharony Green, for joining us today. And we thank you, our listeners and our viewers, for joining us for this edition of Coffee and History, a conversation with Alabama Heritage. And remember, you can find our podcast on our website at alabamaheritage.com or wherever you find your podcast to listen to. We also have our video on YouTube, and that's unedited and streams just as it is. And this is what we are, this is what we look like. So we hope you enjoy that as well. But for now, I think I need some more coffee.
Same.
So goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Did it come out okay?
Except for I can't get it to stop.
Susan, go up and be awkward.
I can do it.
I won't do it.
Oh no, it's fun when we do it. Because
It came with this remote, and
It's
sometimes
not, we're remote